a narcissistic relationship is a full-time job. But never having that quietude of mind ultimately is exhausting you. However, the fix isn't as simple as just meditate. This is why understanding what this relationship is doing to you becomes so important. Let's talk a little bit about heartbreak. Broken hearts, heartbreak, right? See, the thing with these relationships, it's not about the heartbreak. It's about the feeling crazy. Because there's heartbreak and then there's capital H, heartbreak. I mean, a broken heart always feels terrible, right? And we can't compare broken hearts across people. Does a heartbreak feel worse because the relationship lasted longer? Not necessarily. And heartbreak in general actually is getting to be increasingly, people are studying it. It's been studied by physicians and researchers and psychologists and sociologists. The pain is real. There are actually real cardiac effects from heartbreak. We process it similarly to physical pain. It literally hurts us. The physiological effects are also related to the stress of a broken heart. Broken hearts actually do break our hearts. It's a whole thing, all of this heartbreak stuff, right? And when we look backwards across our lifetimes at our broken hearts that have healed, and we can close our eyes and remember when our heart first got broken, and we really remember what that felt like, we gotta sometimes wonder, how do we get to the other side? But most of us get to the other side. And hearts aren't just broken in romantic relationships. It can happen in family relationships, in friendships, with anyone we love, romantic or not. Our heart can be broken. But obviously, the romantic heartbreaks are the ones that get most of the focus, right? Then, though, there is the narcissistic broken heart. The broken heart we have from the narcissistic relationship. And as you know, I've lately been chatting with more people than ever because of the book. And I have talked to lots of folks lately about their broken hearts in narcissistic relationships. The trauma bond can take a broken heart and elevate it to the level of sheer panic. The idea that this is not just the loss of a relationship when a narcissistic relationship ends, but as though a physical part of you was yanked off. But the more I talked to folks, I realized that the broken heart, as painful as it was, may not have been as primary an issue with folks recovering from narcissistic relationships that were ending. The thing that was really the issue was the feeling crazy. I know we're not supposed to use the word crazy, that it's not a technical or even a kind term, but I gotta be frank with you. I sat with this for a minute. It's the only word that works here. You literally feel upside down, not sane, almost in another universe. You feel crazy. And this is the word my clients and folks in these relationships use. I have used it to describe myself in these relationships, because here's the deal. People in narcissistic relationships, in the majority of cases, know that the relationship was not good. At some level, you're like, this is not good. It was mean, it was unkind, it was unpredictable, it was manipulative. The thinking part of your mind gets it. The trauma bonding is what often supersedes that, and we lose sight of it. But when it ends, yeah, it hurts and it's painful, and you may fall into euphoric recall. But there's a tiny part of you that also knew that there was no there in that relationship. It's very different than the heartbreak of losing the sweet love of your life after 50 years, for example. But let's go back to that part about feeling crazy, because that's really the issue. The months, even perhaps the years of walking around and asking yourself, how did I not see this? How did nobody see this? Why does everybody still rally around them? Why did I put up with this? There were good days, right? Why would someone be willing to make someone they were married to for 50 years and who raised children with them? Why are they trying to make it so I can't even afford a place to rent? How could someone do something so cruel? Maybe I don't understand people. Maybe I am not reading this right. This can't be right. I don't live in a Lifetime movie. They had a normal job and friends. How did they move on so quickly? How is this new person not seeing it? Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. You know the carousel. Round and round you go, trying to make your existing sense of this mess, but actually now whatever insanity you were feeling, it feels multiplied 100-fold. You feel crazy. And being made to feel crazy is a terrible thing to do to someone, frankly. And maybe I'm jaded because of what I do for a living. In fact, I know I am. I actually think it's worse to leave someone feeling crazy than it is to break their heart. Hearts heal. I've been in this business for decades. Hearts heal. It's amazing to see before and after pictures of heartbreak. The person who can barely get out of bed to the person who shrugs their shoulders and is even able to make meaning out of their broken heart. But a relationship that leaves someone feeling as though they are crazy, that's just plain wrong. Gaslighting, which is a key dynamic of these kinds of narcissistic relationships, meant that we likely felt crazy while we were in the relationship itself. So when it ends, especially if it was a betrayal or a big barrel of lies, or they move on quickly with someone else, or even when we did every single thing they asked us to, that they still leave and say it wasn't working. And that gets multiplied by all the gaslighted stuff that happened in the relationship. We feel crazy. I have worked with hundreds of folks on this. And the heartache, heartbreak part, listen, I don't mean to minimize it because I know it hurts. That's what I call, though, the psychological chicken soup part. I know they're going to get to the other side through empathy and time and soothing. But the crazy part, folks, healing from that can sometimes take years, literally years. Because even years out, even when a person is well into their healing, the heartbreak, it starts to feel like an ancient blip. People may, for example, run into someone else new that they meet who's going through a narcissistic divorce or a relationship, and some of those old feelings will come up. And a person may go back into that old sense of that relationship and all of it that happened. When I think about it, it still makes me feel crazy. To be made to feel crazy is to be destabilized. All of us learned, even in our childhood storybooks, that hearts break. But when we are destabilized, we stop trusting. We stop trusting ourselves. We stop trusting the world. We doubt our perspectives. We wonder if we're even reading situations right. We dig into our own vulnerabilities and struggles with self-worth. And we wonder if we are the problem. Doing that helps us feel some kind of control over the situation, but it sure as hell doesn't uncrazy it. Other people can also contribute to our feeling of being crazy, because when we go through a narcissistic breakup, other people may actually treat it as basically a garden variety breakup and heartbreak. They may even say, oh, you'll be fine. Sometimes people grow apart, and this is just life, with zero acknowledgement of the toxicity and madness that you have just navigated. And it may even leave you with that terrible sense of, well, this isn't that big a deal. They may really do it if the breakup happens, not because of some more identifiable factor like infidelity, but even if that happens, they may say the usual nonsense of, people grow apart. A narcissistic breakup is not people growing apart. It's you being dismantled. And if they are the one to leave and you feel heartbroken, you don't feel like it was that kind of gentle process of heartbreak, but rather that you felt out of your mind insane and other people didn't see it. I guess I should be glad. It's been a little while since a heartbreak for me, but I did have a recent betrayal and many people around me were minimizing it. And when I confronted the other people, I said, the real crime here is not that you stood behind the other person, but that you left me feeling crazy. That was the part that was not okay. Helping someone healing from a narcissistic breakup isn't as simple as chicken soup and hugs and encouraging rebound flirtations or a weekend away at a spa. To heal from a narcissistic breakup, honestly, it requires almost straight up deprogramming so you feel sane again. To recognize that this relationship worked because you were destabilized and you were asked to sacrifice yourself, but you didn't consent to that. and that healing means that feeling sane. And that feeling sane happens by learning about these dynamics, feeling validated and heard, not by someone saying nonsense about how broken hearts heal. They do. But let me tell you, psyches and your mind and your sanity, that takes a lot longer. Let's talk a little bit about some psychological whiplash. So we'll start here. You might know, what whiplash is. Have you ever experienced whiplash, for example, after a car accident? You're moving along at a decent rate of speed and then you're hit or you hit something, and the shift from going, you're driving along and then you're quickly and boom, you hit something and you stop suddenly means that your head and neck get tossed back quickly, and that particular sort of motion of muscle results in a painful injury. And just for those of you who want some whiplash history, the term actually developed earlier in the 20th century, and the doctor who named it that way was talking about the quick forward-backward motion of a whip, and that's where that name whiplash came from. So now imagine going through whiplash every day. If your body went through that, which I think some professional athletes do, you would be in traction and probably do some relatively permanent harm inside of a week. And yet, the psychological version of this is the experience of every person in a narcissistic relationship. So before we go any deeper into this concept of psychological whiplash, I'm just going to take a quick second, let you know there's 2 in-person events that I'm having this fall for survivors. One is in London, England, from September 5th to the 6th. The other is in North Carolina from November 1st to 3rd. And there's also going to be an event for therapists, also in London, therapists and coaches, also in London, on September 7th. Just wanted to mention that. More information on these events can be found in the video notes. So let's go back to this idea of whiplash. Talk about whiplashing you. I tried to switch topics on you, didn't I? So let's get back to the psychological whiplash. Many survivors have to endure on a daily basis in narcissistic relationships. So you can use it as you're in a narcissistic relationship, you're kind of having a normal day. And then something as simple as you yelling out to them, "Hey, it's starting to rain, can you bring in the trash cans?" results in them having a raging 2-hour tantrum. Or you have a nice anniversary dinner and were even pleased that your partner thought of a lovely restaurant and even gave you a nice card, and then bam, they start raging at you later that evening because they feel that you were not grateful enough to them and didn't appreciate all the trouble they went to set up that special evening. You may go the extra mile in a job, stay late, double check everything, and then bam, you are yelled at for not telling them the time of the meeting, even though you emailed, texted, and called them with it. You are at a family dinner and everyone seems to be having a fine enough time, and then bam, your mother brings up an event from 5 years ago as though it was yesterday and won't let it go, pushing and accusing you until you almost start to cry. Those are just a few examples of what psychological whiplash can look like. It's the bam. It's one way, and then rather quickly it shifts to another, and you're not ready for it because there's, like, again, an accident. That's the thing with whiplash injuries. We're not prepared for them. It's not like we're like putting on our brakes and think we're going to hit. Like it's all of a sudden like, boom, someone stops short and we bash into them, right? There's a lot of wait when psychological whiplash happening. So you're like, wait a minute, wait, what happened? We were just having a nice dinner, or it was just the trash cans. It's going to just take a second, or wait a minute, I told you 5 different ways about the meeting time, or you say to your mother, like, I'm so confused, like that thing you brought up, it happened 5 years ago. We were having such a good time. The whiplash most often shows up in our bodies. If you get a whiplash injury, it shows up as tension, and it shows up in our psychology as hypervigilance. And this whiplash is why many survivors of narcissistic relationships feel like they're chronically on edge, as though they can never relax and that they're forever anxious. Of course you're forever anxious. It's like sitting in a tense position in a car, always prepared for an accident. And the fact is, sitting in that tense position is probably going to make the whiplash worse. Over time, we never relax in a narcissistic relationship. Though those of us who tend to be more of the fawners in terms of our sympathetic nervous system response will find ourselves in the eternal fawn shame cycle to stay safe and then subsequently feel mad at ourselves and feel gross. Those of us who are freezers or flighters may remain in dissociated or stuck states, again, more shame, And there is a wide-eyed quality to people in narcissistic relationships, but not in a good way, in more of a I am watching a horror film way. Remember, you can't talk about the whole whiplash thing with a narcissistic person, right? They will blame you and tell you that you're the problem and that they aren't doing anything differently, but that they are just reacting to something that is wrong in you, which again adds more to your hypervigilance and anxiety, because then you might find yourself trying to change things about yourself and ultimately start silencing yourself. Human beings prefer equilibrium. Unless you're part of that tiny percentage of people who are genuine sensation seekers, the rest of us like rhythm and predictability. We like knowing what's next, and we like routine. When we have those things, we feel safe, and our nervous systems and our bodies relax a bit, which is why building in routine is such a big part of healing and mental health treatment. We also like realistic expectations. Things like, if I'm nice, then the person I'm with, well, that facilitates a warm interaction. If I were to ask something in an appropriate way, the other person will either do it or respond to it appropriately or calmly explain why they might not be able to do it. If I say thank you to someone, then that means I'm showing gratitude. But the narcissistic relationship is an alternate universe. They are people where inside of them an almost paranoid storm is always brewing. Everyone's out to get me. Everyone's mean to me. No one understands me. I am more special. How come everything's not going my way? Churning, grr, grr, angry, angry. And so your simple ask, your small mistake or oversight, or your thank you that wasn't enough, that wasn't telling them they're great enough, is filtered through their angry, aggrieved, entitled processing system. And so you get these wacky, intense, unsettling, whiplashy reactions from them. That is often one of the sort of the catalysts of the whiplash and why it is so confusing, because there is often nothing ostensible that is happening in the context that makes sense. For example, you didn't yell at them or something bad didn't just happen. But to the narcissistic person, because every day is not grandiose fantasy camp for them not feeling special enough is sort of their private internal experience as though something bad is happening, but it's simply something bad to them happening is that something great didn't happen to them that day. So what's the psychological equivalent of a neck injury from whiplash? You feel anxiety, vigilance, you can't sleep, you feel a sense of rumination, constant fear, perfectionism, obsessiveness, wondering if you are crazy, sadness, grief. And there's no neck brace to help treat it. The closest we have is radical acceptance, realistic expectations. I guess those are the equivalent of wearing a seatbelt. Breaking out of the trauma-bonded cycles, having social support, disengaging from the relationship, all the usual stuff. The whiplash also sets up an unfortunate cycle that means that the good moments, instead of being good, or even just the non-abusive moments, instead of being relaxed, we chronically find ourselves tensing up even at those moments because we know that the bad is just around the corner. And all the hypervigilance and watching every word we say and trying to be perfect, it's simply not enough. And while realistic expectations sound good in theory, it is actually really hard to prepare for this kind of shape-shifting and quick reactivity that we see in the narcissistic relationship. And it is exhausting to walk through life always on edge. There are only so many times you can say, it's them, it's not me, and still have to navigate someone who is the equivalent of living with a live grenade in your pocket. The whiplash is real, and it also makes the grief worse. A few decent days may leave you feeling in one of these relationships like, I can do this. But then without fail, their dysregulated or cruel and manipulative behavior or betrayal shows up again. And these mini sequences are grief sequences that can culminate into a melancholy that trails you in your life. Personally, I'm navigating a few of these situations right now, and I actually have to say I'm struck by how heavy I feel all the time. Personally, I think fender benders are easy compared to the daily whiplash of the narcissistic relationship. Sometimes knowing this can also help fuel self-compassion on those days when you feel like you are not at your best. Who would be if they just experienced whiplash? Here's two words you may not always think you're going to hear together, but here they are. Relaxation anxiety. Let's talk a little bit about this. I recently did a live Zoom with my colleague, Dr. Kate Truitt, who studies the neuroscience of trauma. Definitely check out her stuff. We will put it in the show notes, in the video description, so you can go look at her stuff and her books and things like that too. But when we had this sort of Zoom presentation, she talked about something that kind of caught me in my tracks, because it was a terminology I hadn't heard that way, but it was so applicable to survivors of narcissistic abuse, and that is something called relaxation anxiety. Like I said, we don't usually see those two words together. And I was like, ooh, these words really do go together. Relaxation anxiety refers to the anxiety that comes up for a person who experiences all the signs and symptoms of anxiety at times of quiet and relaxation. For example, when you aren't busy managing them or running around doing all the things that need to be done to keep the trains running on time, or just busy with life. When the quiet comes, it can be unsettling for people in toxic or narcissistic relationships, because once you are alone with your thoughts, the thing that often kicks in is rumination. And you may start playing the scripts in your head. And because once you really think about a narcissistic relationship, your two options are to either blame yourself or to see the relationship more clearly. And we know to do that opens up a whole world of pain, because then it may raise issues of shame. Why do I put up with this? Or guilt. Maybe I'm not being too realistic. Or anger. Oh God, I gotta do something about this. This is ridiculous. And trauma-bonded confusion. So altogether, the so-called quiet, relaxed times can become quite overwhelming. But when you look at all of the advice out there about anxiety and managing stress and strong emotions, what is often at the top of the list, mindfulness, meditation, all the stop and slow down stuff, right? It's a lovely idea, and they're all great things to do and ultimately a win. But initially, sometimes doing these sort of slow your mind down things can be experienced as aversive, because even going to sleep at night can feel like too much for folks in narcissistic relationships, who given just one quiet period of mind will ruminate repeatedly. But the quietness of mind is important, and yet it can feel impossible for survivors to get to. Interestingly, when Dr. Truitt was talking about this whole idea of relaxation anxiety, I was sort of stopped in my tracks, because as a lifelong survivor of narcissistic relationships, even to this day, I took a step back at my peripatetic go, 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 go life, working all the time, moving all the time, never letting myself have a moment of mental quietness, and then collapsing into bed at the end of the night. So there is no quiet time before I fall asleep. It all seems so virtuous. Dr. Romani, always working hard, keeping busy. But the problem is, when there is a moment of quiet, or even a roll over and wake up in the middle of the night, and then the thoughts come in, and they are like tornado clouds that make me more anxious, this results in what she speaks about, that the act of relaxation and quiet can actually make a person anxious. It's almost like, what am I supposed to do at this time? Because damn, I don't want to be alone with my thoughts. And that's an experience of many survivors. It's a real issue because survivors of narcissistic relationships are already exhausted because of the relationship itself, running around and constantly managing it and trying to be perfect or wondering what you did wrong or reading their mind. Psychologically, a narcissistic relationship is a full-time job. But never having that quietude of mind ultimately is exhausting you. However, the fix isn't as simple as just meditate. This is why understanding what this relationship is doing to you becomes so important. Understanding the dynamics of the narcissistic relationship, how these relationships work, how narcissism shows up, how it affects you. While it's painful to have to reflect on that stuff, it can help lift some of the confusion. And then you can pace yourself. It may be that initially you find that you can do sort of shorter stretches of mind quieting, guided meditations that give you healthy imagery to focus on, that can be a start. Or using some downtime to read things that are uplifting and not just distracting. Distraction makes sense as a way to let you keep on keeping on. But all of those feelings you don't want to be with don't just distract away. They add up and they take a toll on you mentally and physically. It can also help to know that relaxation anxiety is actually a thing. So many survivors think, oh great, I can't even do meditation right, and that's just sitting still. And I would argue, don't just advance to meditation. Start with good old mindfulness. It's a lighter lift. Mindfulness can be done in small, tiny slices of time. Describing your surroundings to yourself, breathing, and taking in what is around you. Touching in with your feelings throughout the day. Listening to your body and being curious about what it's telling you. Mindfulness can just be an attunement to self, something we are often not able to do in narcissistic relationships, but can be a step one to being able to tolerate a quiet mind at times. It is ironic because I am laying this video idea out and putting this video out there. Originally, I thought about this video on a day that I was ostensibly supposed to be on a day off, right? So that's when I first thought of this. I was in a lovely hotel in a beautiful place on a warm, gorgeous day. And when I woke up that morning, I was flooded with all kinds of uncomfortable thoughts. And I picked up my computer and I started writing instead of being with the thought because that was more uncomfortable to me. So it may be time for a physician to heal thyself, because I also need to go sit in that sun and stare out at the water for a moment and not just read or play a game or write, but just be. And the prospect of just being does actually leave me feeling a little anxious, kind of afraid of my own thoughts. So the very act of relaxation gets turned into something else. And that's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? Right? Please drop in the comments if this is something that you have struggled with in or even out of a narcissistic relationship. This anxiety related to relaxation, this sort of fear of your own thoughts, of the risk of getting pulled into the rumination, or this constant pull into the dissociation of productivity. I do intend, sometime soon, to put the laptop down, lock it up, and leave the comfort of my beloved little laptop for the far scarier place of a lounge chair and some quiet. Wish me luck. Narcissistic relationships are chronic places of fear. From pretty early on, fear of getting it wrong, fear of rage, fear of disappointing them, fear of the relationship ending if you do even one thing wrong, fear that you are to blame. It makes sense because narcissistic relationships are so characterized by rage and an unpredictability. You don't always know what sets the narcissistic person off, and a small thing can result in them having a big blow up. If you don't go along, you may face the silent treatment, passive aggression, or abandonment, which can bring up more fear. There is also an existential fear raised by these relationships, a sense of, who am I without this relationship? Why can't I get it right? What is wrong with me? Ask anyone in or even out of a narcissistic relationship. A prevailing emotion in the relationship was either fear or anxiety. Unfortunately, this fear mind starts to bleed into other areas of your life, because not only do narcissistic relationships fill you with fear, they also leave you feeling risk averse. You no longer trust yourself. You may even have an instinct to do something, and then you second guess yourself and you hold back. Fear of failing, fear of being made fun of for failing, fear of doing the wrong thing. When we view this from a trauma and parts model, some of that holding back is that part of you that is trying to protect you from failure, and then subsequently the anticipation of the narcissistic person's anger or mockery jumping in there, while the voices you hear within you, are you stupid? You're never going to be able to do that. Certainly they feel harmful. They're also simultaneously protective, because yes, failure will be met with shame and more abuse or humiliation from the narcissistic person. Even when you are not doing something that has anything to do with the narcissistic person, their internalized voice, the fears you carry within you, generalize, and thus for years in school, work, and life, you may hold back and not try. Or in some cases, you may overdo it on the other side and take massive risks that could place you in harm's way. It's hard to find your middle of trusting yourself and making reasonable risks. Now, if you grew up with narcissistic parents, in many cases, this fear-based approach can mean that you don't take chances, you don't believe in yourself, and you approach things with a fear mind. And fear minds avoid. A fear mind struggles to make a decision. A fear mind assumes it will all go wrong and expects it to go wrong. A fear mind can be impulsive. And this fear mind can also spring up in adult narcissistic relationships too. So that leads to a big question that relates to healing. How would you respond if you were not afraid? Obviously in places other than the narcissistic relationship, because those are scary. It's okay to be cautious in the narcissistic relationship, because yes, they will snap and bite and criticize. But what about everything else in your life, which is really what matters? What would you do there? How would or could you respond if you were not afraid? Because that is what healing is. The fear response that just bothers and gets so many people after and during narcissistic relationships can mean that you continue to live in what feel like trauma responses, a state of anxious arousal, hypervigilance, and that takes up a lot of bandwidth. You are still in protective mode, and protective mode can often mean that you hold back, which makes sense. Your sympathetic nervous system screams, no, 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 danger! Failure is possible ahead. Humiliation lurks around that corner. Abandonment is sure to come if you speak your mind. But what would you do if you were not fearful? Interestingly, I know that most folks would not throw caution to the wind, and you wouldn't become a big fearless rebel. When you are not afraid, you actually may be more deliberate. Weigh things out, but not just say, no, I can't, but rather, let me think on this and do a deeper dive into whether I want to do something and whether you believe you can do something. how it fits for you as a person with your goals. Your choices aren't rejected from a place of fear, nor are they impulsively engaged in, but they're thought through. As you heal, you become more curious. You wonder if something could be right for you. You actually think about your you, the essence of you. So now, you may decide to take the job, not because you're afraid that if you don't take this job, another won't come, not because that if you don't, then people will leave you or think you are a loser, but because the job is something that you are interested in. It's different to make a choice from that place. Or you may decide to not take the job, not because you think you will fail at it, but because it isn't a good fit. The pay isn't enough, or it's not compelling enough. Again, you are curious about it. You explore it and make your choice, not theirs. I am not saying that this is easy. And you can start this journey of curiosity by being curious about your fear, the origin of it, the reality of it, what you are really afraid of. Listen, folks, if you're going to be living in fear, then at least unpack it. For example, if you are afraid of abandonment, if you failed at something, first of all, not such a bad thing if the narcissistic person went away, but I know it's not that simple. But that abandonment wound is often primal for us. So be curious, where is that from? Perhaps you had a withholding narcissistic parent, or a narcissistic person who would disappear, or give you the silent treatment, or perhaps there was some other early loss. In the early to middle part of healing, fear is everywhere, but you have to pull the weed out from the very bottom roots, or it will come back. Individuation and healing mean getting yourself to this point of wondering how you would move through the world if you were not afraid, and then really do a deep dive into the reality and the not reality of your fears. The narcissistic person may make fun of you if you don't do well, for example. But so what? You know that their maneuver is to try to make themselves big, to leave you small, to fill their supply needs, and to dominate. They really aren't making fun of you. They're just trying to make themselves taller. But while it is happening, none of it feels good. However, even getting it out of the realm of fear into the realm of disgust is an important pivot. Healing from trauma in all its forms is about healing the fear mind, physiologically consoling ourselves, recognizing that the fear response keeps us safe, and then allowing ourselves to see how it all works. I'm going to ask it again. How would you move through the world if you weren't afraid of the narcissist? There is a lot of you that the world needs to see. Start with curiosity and see if you can slowly step back out of it. Take those fear glasses off and put a different pair on. Thanks again.